Thank you, Jamie. Yeah, my name is Jason Schrader, as he said. I work with Southern Company Gas as a GIS analyst. Last year was the first year that I'd heard of FME. The world tour was coming to Atlanta. We're based out of Atlanta, and so I decided that would be something that I could probably use in my work. So I attended the world tour there and saw how people were using the FME to do their work, and I was just really amazed by what people were doing with it and the potential that it could have in my work. And so ever since I've been granted access to it, so after the world tour, I went back to my boss and I said, I need this, and I pestered him for about a month straight until they finally got me the software, and I've just been using it every day since, and it's really transformed the capabilities at my job as a GIS analyst. So. Okay, so a little bit about my company, Southern Company Gas. We have two headquarters, really. We just purchased Nicor Gas, which is in Illinois, as you see up there. They take care of everything in Illinois, and our headquarters for the rest of everything you see on the eastern seaboard there, we're in Midtown Atlanta. We take care of everything on the right side of that map there. We have 7 LDCs, which are local distribution companies in 7 different states: Illinois, Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, Virginia, Maryland, and New Jersey. We have roughly 4.5 million customers and approximately 79,000 miles of distribution main. Whoops, excuse me. So it's split up pretty equally, 50-50. Half of our customers are in Illinois, and half the customers are on the eastern seaboard there that you see, with the vast majority of those being in Georgia, about 1.6 million where we're headquartered there. So the talking points that I'll be going over today are FME, and specifically the tweaks that you can utilize to work with Excel and streamline your Excel output. And then I'm going to touch a little bit on FME and its ability to use 64-bit and work with enterprise databases, and finally how I use user parameters in the work that I do. So one thing as a GIS analyst, we use Excel quite a bit to share our data. It seems it's very portable. People like to look at the data, and not everybody in our organization has access to ArcMap and whatnot. So we use Excel to push out a lot of our reports, and it seems like ArcMap and Excel is not really tightly integrated. ArcMap can spit out data to Excel, but in my experience, it has not always been, fortuitous, and it's not tightly integrated. It doesn't work well in a lot of cases. And if you produce a lot of reports, you end up formatting, repetition, a lot of wasted time. So this is just an example. Where you would use this is if you have like a canned report, something that you're going to produce to one of your shareholders that they want to report. They want it daily, they want it weekly, they want it monthly. This is just an example of maybe a monthly report that I would produce here. And you can just see all the steps that I would go through in order to produce this report. Insert the pivot table, resize the chart, type some names in there, remove some items, rename some things, do some sorting, format so that the decimal places and the commas are all in the right place. And as you can see, it ends up being a lot of time. And since I do this a lot in my job, I hate wasting time. And so FME has been a great tool to help save time with this kind of production. So how can we use FME to save time? The answer for me has been to use a template in our Excel writer file. And if you go into the navigation pane within FME, there's a couple of settings that are important there for this. The first one is overwrite existing file. You set that to yes. So when you set your template file up, you'll probably produce some sample data a few times, and if you don't have this set to yes, what you'll do is you'll append to the end of that Excel file. So you keep adding rows to it, and you'll get some funky data. If you set that to yes, it's going to wipe out that data file every time. Instead of appending to it, it's going to create a new one. And the other thing is just the path to your template file. So I just thought I'd go into a demo of how I spit my data out into Excel here and share with some of our shareholders. Uh-oh. There it is. Okay. This might be challenging. I hadn't thought about this. It's only on that screen. So I have 3 sheets here, the main services and valves there, and this, basically what I'm using FME is to spit out tables on each one of these worksheets, and each one of these has a named range, basically. And the one thing that I wanted to stress with this slide is when you're setting up your template file, you're going to feed it some sample data, and you just want to make sure that your charts, so what I'm doing here is I'm using a pivot table and a pivot chart, so that the pivot table and chart looks at those tables there on the other worksheets, and pulls it in and spits it out in these tables and charts. So what I'm trying to say here is to, make sure you work with a lot of different types of data so that your charts look good no matter what you feed it. So if you're feeding it one value, like for instance, in this instance, Baldwin is a county. And this might be a service center where there's only one county. I might get a request from somebody else that says, I want you to run this service center and it has 10 counties. I'm saying that because if you put 10 counties in there, your graph might look stretched or squashed. So you just want to stress on formatting your data so that it looks good no matter how much data or how little data you throw at it. Okay, so some, some settings in the pivot table options. Again, you point your pivot table to the data sheets that you're producing, and one of the things that I've found that's not turned on by default is refresh data when opening the file. And what this does, if you ever open up a worksheet that you've saved with pivot table in there, it caches that data in there. It doesn't look at it live until you manually refresh it. So as soon as you open up the Excel workbook with that option checked, it will look at the new data that you just wrote into this file from FME and repopulate that pivot table. So if you don't even have to open this file up when you give it to your person, the person that you're going to distribute it to, because as soon as they open it up, it'll automatically look at the new data that you just put into those tables. Now, the other option that's important, the other tweak that's important here is the number of items to retain per field, which is none. So when you set your template file up, you're going to have some sample data in there, and that template file, you don't ever want to modify it. It's going to sit there, and FME is going to look at that to know how to format the data when it writes it to it. By setting this to none, what you're doing is you're purging the data from the pivot table. So when you have your old data in there, the pivot table has Baldwin in there, that county. When I write new data in, and Baldwin isn't part of that data set, if this is not set to none, it will still display, when you go to filter that pivot table, it will still display Baldwin in there. So this, if you set this to none, it'll purge that old data, and when they go to filter the tables, they'll only see data that's relevant to them. Now this is a couple more settings that are on the Excel writer itself. You click on the gear, you get into the properties here. The first one here on the upper right is truncate existing sheet and named range. You want to set that to yes. Otherwise, it will just append the data in that template file. So you have those tables in your template file and those named ranges. If that's set to no, it'll just add on to the end of that, and you'll get some funky results there, and people might wonder what you're giving them, why you're giving them bad data. So that setting that to yes deletes all of it and writes in the new data. The other setting that's important here is in the sheet name under the General tab. So you put this in the format of sheet name / named range. So in my example, I had services, I had main tab, I had a valves tab. So in this example here, this is my services pivot report. The worksheet is called services. In the named range, the table where you'd be putting the data. See if I can get back here to this. Now again. into the name manager. So right here, these are the named ranges. This is basically where FME is going to write the data into this range here. It's going to write into those columns there. So as you can see, my table is called services table, and it's on the services worksheet. So that format is very important, that sheet name / named range. Excuse me again. Okay, get back here. Okay, so this is the end of the Excel portion. You know, if you use Excel templates, you can create some consistent reports for your customers, and the key thing here is saving time. If you have a canned report that you're going to produce with regularity, you know, why format that data all the time over and over again? Using FME with a template file, you know, it reduces that completely. And so, you know, some people might say, you know, why would you do it this way? Why not use Model Builder and ArcMap and spit the data out to a personal geodatabase, set up a data source in ArcMap, and then you can still have the pivot table refresh and just look out to that personal geodatabase, which is an Access database. You know, if you set FME up, you could just overwrite that data in that personal geodatabase every time. And the reason I like this setup is because I've run into limitations with personal geodatabases, and they're kind of an archaic technology that's going away. They're 32-bit, so if you're going to start moving forward with GIS, you're going to be looking at 64-bit. Plus, if you're working with enterprise databases, you're likely going to be working with millions and millions of records, and then you'll run out of space in that personal geodatabase because there's only a couple of million, I think a couple gigabytes worth of data you can put in there. Also, so then if you'd like to put it into a file geodatabase, but a file geodatabase is proprietary, so you can't connect to a file geodatabase from within Excel. So, you know, the data that I'm doing with this, with my analysis in my Workbench file, it's disposable, basically. All I care about is that summary at the end, so I crunch all this data and just, it sits in memory in FME, and then it gets discarded at the end, so. And also, it's challenging to work with non-GIS data in GIS, so FME does a really good job with that. So, and since we're talking about 64-bit data, I thought I would go into this because this will come up. This happens on my desktop. I've got 16 gigabytes of data, and if I bring in a couple million records and do some transformations to it, eventually this will happen. You get some errors that FME wants too much memory, and it's going to crash. So I figured the way around it is by using Google, of course, going out there and look at FME forums and figuring it out. But there's an option that you can go into the FME Workbench and click on Tools, Edit Header, and you add a first line in there. It's right there. It says FME engine memory red line 0.125. Now the valid values here are from 0 to 0.5. Now 0.5 is the default, which is not going to work for you if you've run out of memory, because that's the upper limit. And so from tweaking around, I found that 0.125 worked for me. So once I got up to that area of the danger zone, it started writing those records to disk. And I'll show you on the next slide here, where memory monster, good, bad, and ugly. So it's awesome that FME can use that much memory. You can, if you have a desktop where you've got 64 gigabyte, that's even better. But I'm limited to 16 gigabytes right here, my desktop. And as you can see in this workbench here, I joined 2 million records from our customer database into 2 million records from our GIS database, and it started consuming over 11 gigabytes. And I think it eventually my computer ran out of memory at 14 gigabytes. So that's when I started tweaking this memory red line. And as you can see down here at the bottom, when you run the workbench, after you tweak the memory red line, it doesn't tell you right away that you've actually done something good that might be beneficial or not beneficial. But when you run the workbench and you have your logging turned on, look at the log file down below, And you'll see what actually is happening here. So what this is telling me, FME configuration, when I set it to 0.125, it says I have 16 gigabytes available. And that once I hit 11.93 gigabytes with my FME process, it's going to start taking all that data from RAM and throwing it back at disk until I get enough memory back. And it's going to keep doing that until I get down below, until I have 8.95 gigabytes of RAM that's being consumed by FME. So I watched this the other day, and it was actually pretty neat watching the memory go up and down. So once it got up to about 11.9 or something like that, it stopped processing all these records, and it sat there for a while and ran to disk. And it's not as efficient, but if you were running out of space, it might be a necessary thing for you, and it's a good tweak to know. So then, talking about enterprise databases, at Southern Company Gas, one of the issues that we have is that GIS is not the system of record for the status of a premise. And so what I mean by that is, so we're a gas company, we have meters at each of our customers, right? So GIS knows where they are, and we know where the main is and all that kind of stuff, but we do not know whether they're active or inactive. Somebody just shut off their meter. Do they have a service with the meter there? Do they have a service without a meter there? So all that information is in CIS. And frequently we get audited by the Public Service Commission. They want to know how many customers are on right now, how many are inactive, whatnot. And so we can't just go to GIS and say, here's the data, because it's not there. So the traditional way before I used FME would be to go and ask our DBAs to export all this data from CIS into a table, and then I would bring it into GIS, and it's just a very long, time-consuming process. But with FME, I can just connect to those data sources and mash up those records and do it within minutes, whereas before it would take hours or days. And again, another issue is that when we're talking about millions of records, it becomes even harder and harder to work in GIS when you're talking about millions of records. So the solution that I've come up with to help with this type of reporting and analysis is to use user parameters within FME. And the format is important there. It's $, and you put the variable or the user parameter, which in this case is LDC. You put that within the brackets. And I'll use SQL Creator to connect to our CIS database, which is a non-GIS database, and use feature merger to merge those two together, which is very similar to ArcGIS join. It just does it in memory until you tell it that you want to write it out to something. So this is an example here of using the SQL Creator to connect to our CIS database. So depending on your setup in your organization, you might have a view already set up from your DBAs that has the data that you want. In our case, we do not have one set up that tells us the status of the premises. So I had to craft a bunch of custom SQL query here, either way, if you have a view, you just connect to it and pull it in. If you don't, you might need somebody to help you create the code that you need, or if you have the knowledge or insight, you can do it yourself. And so that's, in this case, that's what I've done. I've just put a bunch of SQL code together. And the way that I use the user parameter to control what I'm asking from our database, because I think our database, aside from Georgia, has several million records in it, and so I don't want to pull everything from that database. And so I'll put the user parameter in the where clause here. So I say where u.utility name, which is our LDC, our local distribution company name, and in LDC. So the user parameter is right in the SQL statement and controls what record you're pulling from the database. And up here, this is the user parameter. So when I run the workspace, it prompts me. It says, here's your user parameter. What do you want? And I'll say E, which is New Jersey and Maryland, or F, which is Florida. So then it goes out there and only grabs which records I'm asking it to grab. Much more efficient. Whereas before, it seemed like we were just processing all the records, and if you're doing 32-bit processing, it's really hard to work with a couple million records without running out of space. So this is my final slide here. Just an example. I wanted to show that this is the way that we use SQL Creator to connect with GIS and use feature merger to join it all together, and I call that Happy Land. So. Just wanted to say that FME has been a great resource for us. And so with that, I'll open it up to questions if anybody has any. Yes, sir.
Do you use any specific vendors technology for your CIS? I meant is your CIS based on something like SAP or any of the
No, I don't think so. I think our CIS is a custom. It's a SQL database, but I think it was developed custom in-house. And we're migrating over to CC&B now, which is customer care and billing. So that database is getting transitioned to another one, which is from the Illinois office. So we're going to use their model, which I think is also another proprietary customer database. So. Yes, sir.
Once the join data is coming out of the feature merger, how are you guys consuming that data? Web services or apps?
Well, we're not actually consuming it with any web maps yet. I have plans. I've asked for us to get FME Server. So what I want to do is use this data to put it up out to a SQL database so that we can consume it with Power BI and have dashboards out there for service center managers to just pull this data as they're needed. And some of these reports, a manager might come and ask for it, and so I want to use FME Server as well and just say, hey, here you go put your service center in there and run it and get the data yourself as well. So I think Excel is something, you know, with Power BI coming, I think Excel is kind of going to be used less, but there's still all those people in our organization that want the data in their hands, and they like the look and feel of Excel. So does that answer your question? Okay. Yes, sir.
How often would your report structure change? Like, have you changed your template much since you started?
No, I've only been doing this for a couple of months now, but I've been doing those reports for, you know, a couple of years, I guess, and I haven't changed, you know. Some of them do change, maybe once every 6 months or so, but pretty much stays the same, yeah, unless we find something that somebody has been missing something all this time and now they want to ask for something. So but it's easy enough to go in there and modify it to suit your needs. Yes, sir.
I just have a quick comment. I have kind of a similar workflow with what I do, and one thing I've found recently is instead of using feature merger to join together, I'll use a feature reader, and that way I can set a where clause to use an attribute value from the requester, and you can get much more granular with your where clauses.
Okay.
It sped it up probably 100-fold for me. Maybe something you could explore.
Great. Thank you. Yes.
Have you worked with the 2017 FME between the 32 and the 64-bit? Like, have you had to do any kind of, I don't know if you've used either format and then had to bridge any changes in your functionality?
I haven't used 2017 extensively yet, so I created a workbench in it, and then I was like, maybe I need to hold off on this because we're still only being supported at 2016 in our organization, so I don't want to create things in 2017 and then have 2016 be the officially supported one. So I haven't really had a chance to play with 2017 much yet. So. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.